Please, Mom, just sign here. Emily's voice was soft, almost sweet, the same tone she used when she was little. Standing in the kitchen and asking for candy money before dinner. But now she was 35 years old, and her hand pressed mine down toward the pen on the table while her husband, Jason, gripped my arm so tightly it felt like my bones were screaming. We were sitting inside a bank. That was the part that terrified me the most. People moved around us like nothing unusual was happening. A young teller typed at his computer. An elderly woman flipped through an insurance brochure in line. A man in a navy suit scrolled through his phone, waiting his turn. The normal hum of everyday life filled the room, the quiet whir of air conditioning, the distant clicking of counting machines, while my entire world collapsed at a small round table near the windows. It's just routine, Mom, Emily said, smiling politely in the direction of the security cameras. A small transfer so we can get some paperwork sorted out. But I had seen the documents. It wasn't small. It was everything. Every dollar I had left. $50,000, my entire savings, the money my husband, Robert, Bob, and I had saved over 46 years of marriage. What remained after he died 3 years earlier? What was supposed to carry me through the rest of my life? The fluorescent lights above us burned my eyes. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a belt around my ribs and kept pulling. Sweat gathered along my spine even though the room was cold. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, loud enough to drown out everything else. Jason leaned closer, his breath smelling of cigarettes and stale coffee. Come on, Maggie, he whispered. Don't make this harder than it has to be. His fingers tightened around my arm. Just slightly, but enough to make my throat close. It hurt. Not enough to leave a scene, not yet, but enough to remind me that he was in control. Think about Lily, he continued softly. Think about everything we've done for you. The irony burned so sharply I tasted it in the back of my throat. Everything they had done for me? I was the one who had paid for Emily's college tuition when she insisted she couldn't possibly attend a state school. I was the one who had taken out loans so she could have the wedding of her dreams. I was the one who had given them $40,000 for a house down payment and another $20,000 when Jason lost his job the year before, money they had promised to pay back and never did. And now they were here, smiling under fluorescent lights, trying to take the very last thing I had. The pen felt heavy in my trembling hand. The ink inside looked impossibly dark against the crisp white paper. Permanent, final, one signature and it would all be gone. One signature and I would be 79 years old with nothing but a widow's pension and the hope that my daughter wouldn't abandon me once she had drained me dry. Emily leaned in closer, her perfume mixing with the sharp scent of my fear. Mom, trust me, she murmured. This is for your own good. You can't manage this kind of money at your age. Poisoned honey, every word carefully chosen to sound loving while stripping me of my dignity. I looked around desperately, searching for someone, anyone, who might notice. The teller's eyes flicked in our direction and then away. The woman in line adjusted her glasses. No one saw a crime taking place in plain sight. No one noticed a mother being robbed with polite smiles and affectionate words. Jason squeezed my arm harder. A small, broken sound escaped my throat before I could stop it. Shut up, he muttered under his breath. Still smiling outwardly. We don't want to make a scene. His eyes were cold, calculating, and for the first time, I truly understood that this man was capable of more than manipulation. What hurt even more was that Emily saw it. She saw her husband hurting me, her own mother, and she didn't say a word. She didn't tell him to stop. She just kept smiling for the cameras. The clock on the wall read 3:15 p.m. A regular Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day people forget as soon as it passes. For me, it would never end. That morning, Emily had called with urgency in her voice. Mom, we need to go to the bank. There are some papers you have to sign. It's important. She hadn't explained anything. She never did. She gave orders wrapped in the word please. And I followed them because I always had. Now the bank manager, a man in his late 50s named William Harris, approached our table with a professional smile. Everything all right here? He asked. Can I help with anything? Hope flared inside me so suddenly it almost hurt. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Without thinking, without planning, my hand moved. I grabbed a scrap of paper from the table and wrote as quickly as I could. "Help. I'm being coerced. I don't want to sign." I folded the note and slid it toward him while Emily and Jason were busy reviewing the documents. Mr. Harris opened it discreetly. His expression changed instantly. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and in that silent exchange, I knew he understood exactly what was happening. Without a word, he pressed a button beneath the desk, a silent alarm. For the first time all afternoon, my chest loosened just a little. Someone was going to help me. But to understand how I ended up here, trembling in a bank, silently begging for rescue, you need to know who I was before this moment. My name is Margaret Collins. Most people call me Maggie. I am 69 years old. And all my life, I was the woman who always said yes. I wasn't always the woman shaking in a bank chair, afraid of her own daughter. There was a time when my life felt simple. Not easy, never easy, but honest. I married Robert Collins when I was 23. Bob worked long hours at a small manufacturing plant. And I worked wherever I could find steady income, hospital cafeterias, cleaning offices at night, taking extra shifts whenever they were available. We weren't rich, but we were careful. We saved. We planned. We believed that if we worked hard enough, life would eventually reward us with stability. When Emily was born, everything changed. I still remember that spring morning clearly. After 12 hours of labor, the nurse placed her in my arms, small, warm, perfect. She had Bob's green eyes and a cry that filled the room with life. Holding her, exhausted and overwhelmed, I made a promise I would spend the next 35 years keeping far too well. I promised she would never lack for anything. At first, that promise felt noble, necessary. When Emily was 5, she begged for a pink bicycle she'd seen at a neighbor's house. It cost $200, a fortune for us back then, but Bob and I took extra shifts, skipped dinners out, and bought it anyway. The look on her face when she saw it leaning against the garage wall made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. When she was 15, she wanted to attend a summer camp that cost $1,500. I sold my grandmother's jewelry to pay for it. I told myself objects could be replaced. Memories couldn't. By the time Emily reached high school, she had learned something important about me, something I didn't realize I was teaching her. If she wanted something badly enough, I would find a way. When she announced she wanted to attend a private university, not a state school, I tried to reason with her. The tuition was $40,000 a year. We didn't have that kind of money. "Mom, it's my dream," she said, tears pooling in her eyes. "What will my friends think if I don't go?" So Bob and I took out a loan against our house. For 4 years, I worked double shifts, my feet swollen, my back aching, scrubbing tables late into the night while Emily studied business administration and lived the life she believed she deserved. When she graduated with honors, I cried in the audience, convinced I had done my job as a mother. I thought the sacrifices would end there. They didn't. At 25, Emily met Jason at a bar near campus. He was charming in the way men like him always are, confident, smooth, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The first time I met him, he didn't ask how I was or thank me for dinner. He asked if the house was paid off. I should have listened to the unease that settled in my stomach. Their wedding cost $50,000. "Mom, I'm only getting married once," Emily pleaded. "I want it to be perfect." Bob had just been diagnosed with diabetes. We needed money for medication, specialists, a strict diet. I wanted to say no. I even rehearsed the words in my head. But when I saw Emily in her white lace dress, glowing with excitement, I swallowed my objections and signed for another loan. The wedding was beautiful. I'll give her that. Emily looked like a princess. Jason smiled, but his eyes kept scanning the room, measuring guests, calculating wealth. I didn't know it then, but he was already evaluating the value of the family he had married into. After their honeymoon, another expense we covered, the calls began. "Mom, the refrigerator broke." "Mom, the car needs repairs." Mom, Jason lost his job. We can't make rent. It was always urgent, always temporary, always followed by promises that never materialized. 2 years into their marriage, Emily announced they wanted to buy a house. It's an investment, Mom, she explained, a step toward our future. The house cost $200,000. They needed $40,000 for the down payment. They had no savings. Their credit was bad. Could you help us? Emily asked softly. Just this once. I promise we'll pay you back. I withdrew $40,000 from my retirement fund, money I had spent 20 years building. The bank officer warned me about the penalties. 10% lost instantly. $4,000 gone before I even touched the money. Are you sure? He asked gently. I told him yes. It was for my daughter. Emily cried when I handed her the check. She hugged me and called me the best mother in the world. Jason thanked me with a firm handshake that felt more like a transaction than gratitude. They moved into the house 3 months later. It was large, modern, far nicer than anything Bob and I had ever lived in. I walked through it with pride, telling myself every sacrifice had been worth it. But the requests didn't stop. Furniture, a fence, kitchen renovations, new appliances. Every hesitation was met with the same weapon. What about Lily? My granddaughter became the shield Emily hid behind. Lily was 8 years old, bright and gentle, with Bob's curious eyes and a kindness her mother had lost somewhere along the way. She brought me drawings from school, pictures of me as a giant grandmother with huge arms. I made you big because your love is big, she would say. How do you say no to that? I paid for ballet lessons, piano lessons, summer camp, costumes, every expense justified by potential and opportunity. Meanwhile, Bob's health deteriorated. His medication cost hundreds of dollars a month. Insurance covered some, but never enough. I worked more, slept less, ate cheaply. I never once asked Emily for help. It's my responsibility, I told myself. Parents take care of their children, not the other way around. Bob died early one Tuesday morning, 3 years after his diagnosis. I held his hand as he took his last breath and felt half of myself disappear with him. After the funeral, I sat alone in our quiet house and faced the truth. We were broke. The life insurance paid $50,000. It was all I had left. I promised myself things would be different. I promised myself I would learn to say no. 2 months later, Emily called. Jason had lost his job again. And they needed $20,000 to keep the house from foreclosure. I gave it to them. And now, sitting in a bank at 315 on a Tuesday afternoon. They were trying to take the rest. Mr. William Harris' office was small but warm, a sharp contrast to the cold panic I had felt out in the main lobby. Framed photographs of his family lined one wall. A small cactus sat on the windowsill, leaning toward the afternoon light. He closed the door gently behind us and gestured for me to sit. Mrs. Collins, he said, lowering his voice, tell me what's really going on. The question cracked something open inside me. At first, the words came slowly, stumbling over one another like they had been waiting too long to be spoken. Then they rushed out all at once. I told him about the years of money transfers disguised as help. About the promises that were never kept. About the way my daughter knew exactly how to use my love for my granddaughter to make me comply. I told him about Jason's hand crushing my arm. About the bruises that would bloom later. About how Emily watched and did nothing. I told him that the $30,000 left in my account were all I had to live on. That without them, I would have nowhere to go. Mr. Harris listened without interrupting. He took notes carefully, nodding now and then, his expression grave but controlled. When I finished, my throat burned and my eyes ached. But for the first time in years, I felt lighter. What you're describing, he said finally, is financial coercion. In some cases, it qualifies as elder abuse. The word abuse echoed in my head. I had spent decades believing this was simply the price of being a good mother. That love meant sacrifice, even when it hurt. That family obligation excused everything. You're telling me this is illegal? I asked quietly. Yes, ma'am, he replied, and more importantly, it's not your fault. I stared down at my hands. They no longer trembled. I don't want to destroy my family, I said. She's my daughter. I understand, he said gently, but protecting yourself doesn't mean you don't love her. It means you're setting boundaries. Boundaries. The word felt foreign in my mouth. Here's what we're going to do, Mr. Harris continued. We're canceling this transaction immediately. I'm placing alerts on all your accounts. No one will be able to access your funds without your physical presence and additional verification. I'm also going to give you information for legal and protective resources. He paused, then looked at me directly. But none of this matters unless you're ready to say no. I thought of Bob, of the nights we spent calculating bills at the kitchen table, of the years we postponed vacations, new clothes, small joys, because there was always something more important. I thought of Lily, growing up watching her mother manipulate her grandmother. Yes, I said, I'm ready. When we walked back into the main lobby, Emily and Jason looked up instantly. Emily's smile froze when she saw my face. Jason straightened, his jaw tightening. What took so long? Emily asked sharply. We're late. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a woman who had built her entire adult life on my inability to refuse her. I'm not signing, I said. The words landed between us like broken glass. What? Emily laughed nervously. Mom, stop. We already talked about this. We didn't talk, I replied. You decided, and I'm done. Jason stepped forward, but two security guards moved just as quickly, positioning themselves between us. His eyes flashed with something ugly before he forced a smile. Don't be ridiculous, Maggie, he said. What are you even going to do with that money? We can invest it better. For the family. For the family, I repeated. Like when you invested the $40,000 I gave you for your house? Or the $20,000 I gave you when you lost your job? How much of that have you paid back? His mask cracked. Those were gifts, he snapped. No, I said, they were promises you broke. Emily began to cry, loud enough for nearby customers to turn their heads. But I recognized those tears. They were strategic. I can't believe you're doing this, she sobbed. After everything we've shared. You call this love? I asked quietly. You call hurting me love? People were watching now. Mr. Harris stepped forward. Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller, he said firmly, you need to leave. Emily stared at me with something I had never seen before, not sadness. Not disappointment, but rage. Fine, she said coldly, but don't come crying to us when you're alone. The doors closed behind them with a soft, final sound. The silence afterward felt enormous. The days that followed were worse than I expected. Emily called constantly. When I didn't answer, the messages began. First guilt, then concern, then accusation. She suggested I was confused. That I needed a doctor. That strangers had filled my head with lies. On the third day, they came to my house. I watched through the curtains as Emily rang the doorbell again and again. Jason standing behind her, Lily between them holding a drawing. My heart nearly broke. Why won't Grandma open the door? Lily asked, her small voice carrying through the glass. I backed away, pressed my hands over my ears, and reminded myself of Mr. Harris' words. Fear and guilt were their strongest weapons. Later that night, my sister Susan called. Emily says you've become paranoid, she said gently, that they were just trying to help you. Did she tell you Jason hurt me? I asked. Silence. Did she tell you they've taken over $100,000 from me? I continued. Susan sighed. She's your daughter, Maggie. Yes, I replied, and this is abuse. A few days later, Lily came to my door alone. I opened it. She asked why I hadn't been giving her money anymore. I asked her if she loved me because I gave her money or because I was her grandmother. Her confusion told me everything I needed to know. That night, I cried harder than I had since Bob died. But something inside me had shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't giving in. The silence that followed was unfamiliar and unsettling. For years, my days had been punctuated by Emily's calls, requests disguised as concern. Urgency wrapped in affection. Without them, the house felt strangely hollow. I would wake up expecting my phone to buzz, my stomach already tightening in anticipation of another crisis that needed my money to fix it. When the phone stayed quiet, I didn't feel relief at first. I felt lost. Who was I if no one needed me? I spent the first few days sitting in my living room, surrounded by framed photographs that suddenly felt accusatory. Emily at graduation, Emily on her wedding day, Lily in a pink ballet costume, smiling with missing teeth. In every picture, I stood just outside the frame, the unseen support, the silent provider. On the fourth day after the bank incident, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, I barely recognized the young woman standing there. She was tall, with brown hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, her posture confident but her expression careful. "Mrs. Collins?" she asked. "My name is Rachel Turner." The name stirred faint memories. She was my great-niece, Susan's granddaughter, someone I had seen only a handful of times at family gatherings years ago. "Please come in," I said, stepping aside. "Would you like some tea?" We sat across from each other in the living room, steam rising between us as she told me why she had come. Her father had heard what happened at the bank and asked her to speak to me, not to judge. Not to lecture, but to listen. "I went through something very similar with my own mother," Rachel said quietly. She told me about years of manipulation disguised as emergencies, about money taken from her college savings, about forged signatures and empty promises, about learning, painfully, that unconditional love does not mean unconditional access. "I had to cut contact for 2 years," she admitted. "It almost broke me, but it also saved my life." Her words settled into me like seeds finding soil. Before she left, Rachel hugged me tightly. "What you did at that bank was brave," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without my phone beside my bed. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. I started doing things for myself. Small things at first, walking in the park where Bob and I used to stroll on Sunday mornings. Cooking meals I liked instead of what Emily preferred. Reading books that had been collecting dust for decades because there was never enough time. On Tuesday evening, I walked into the public library downtown, heart racing, and followed a small sign that read Support Group, Conference Room B. 12 people sat in a loose circle. Most were my age, some older, some younger. All of them carried the same tired, haunted look I recognized in the mirror. When it was my turn to speak, the story poured out of me. Not just the bank, not just the money, the fear, the guilt, the belief that love had to be earned through sacrifice. No one interrupted, no one judged. Afterward, the facilitator, a woman named Linda Moore, spoke gently. "Financial abuse by family members is one of the hardest forms of abuse to recognize," she said, "because it hides behind love." That night, when I returned home, there were 3 voicemails waiting from Emily. I listened to them with new ears. Guilt, gaslighting, concern weaponized into accusation. I deleted them all. The next morning, my phone rang again. "Grandma?" Lily's small voice came through the speaker. "Mommy says you won't talk to us anymore." My chest tightened. I told her I loved her. I told her sometimes adults have problems they need to solve. And when she asked for money for a new ballet dress, I finally heard the pattern clearly. Emily had taught her this. When Emily took the phone, her voice was calm, rehearsed. She accused me of abandoning them, of changing suddenly, of forgetting my role. "No," I said quietly, "I'm remembering who I am." The conversation ended without resolution. But for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to apologize. That afternoon, I walked downtown alone. I wandered into a bookstore and bought 3 novels without checking prices. I sat in a cafe and ordered a slice of chocolate cake simply because I wanted it. As I took the first bite, something extraordinary happened. I felt free. That evening, Rachel called to invite me to dinner with her family. I accepted without hesitation. I was beginning to understand that losing one toxic relationship had made room for something I never expected. Peace. 6 months after the day at the bank, I woke up in a room I didn't recognize. For a moment, panic fluttered in my chest, the old reflex, until I noticed the light. It came in softer here, filtered through white curtains that moved gently with the morning breeze. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and warm bread instead of dust and old memories. Then I remembered. I was in Italy. Tuscany, to be exact. A small bed and breakfast nestled between rolling hills and olive trees. A place I had booked with my own money, without asking anyone's permission or seeking anyone's approval. It was my first international trip alone. At 69 years old, I was finally seeing the world beyond the boundaries of obligation. The idea hadn't been mine at first. It had been Rachel's. "You've spent your whole life taking care of other people," she'd said over dinner one night, scrolling through photos on her phone. "You deserve to do something just for yourself." At first, I laughed it off. Women like me didn't travel alone to Europe. Women like me stayed home. They waited. They saved money for emergencies that might never come and called that responsibility. But something in me had changed. So I applied for a passport for the first time in my life. I bought comfortable walking shoes and luggage that didn't belong to anyone else. When Emily found out, she called furious. "You're spending your retirement money on a vacation?" she demanded. "What if something happens? What if you get sick?" "I have insurance," I replied calmly, "and I have savings. After 40 years of work, I'm allowed to enjoy some of it." She hung up on me. Sitting now on the small terrace with a cup of strong Italian coffee and a warm cornetto, I smiled at the memory. Below me, the valley stretched out in shades of green and gold, dotted with ancient trees that had survived centuries of storms simply by standing their ground. My phone vibrated. For a brief second, my heart jumped, an old habit, but it was Rachel. "Send photos," she wrote. "I want proof you're actually relaxing." I sent her a picture of the landscape and typed back, "I feel like a completely different person." Her reply came quickly. "You're not different. You're finally being yourself." I spent the day wandering through narrow streets, stopping at markets, listening to languages I didn't understand but somehow felt comforted by. No one here knew me as Emily's mother or Lily's grandmother. No one expected anything from me. I was simply a woman walking through the world. Back home, my life continued to change in quiet ways. I joined a painting class at the community center after meeting Eleanor, a 75-year-old woman from the support group who had mortgaged her house 3 times for a son who never stopped asking. Together, we learned to paint landscapes. I discovered I had a talent for it, something that surprised me more than any betrayal ever had. I also began volunteering at a shelter for women escaping domestic violence. The stories I heard were painful, but they grounded me. For the first time, I was helping others from a place of strength, not guilt. Without Emily and Jason's constant demands, my finances stabilized. I built an emergency fund. I invested cautiously. I stopped feeling anxious every time I checked my bank balance. One afternoon, while shopping for groceries, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Maggie Collins?" a familiar voice asked. It was Mr. William Harris. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "I had some news I thought you'd want to hear." My stomach tightened despite myself. "Emily and Jason came into the bank last week," he continued. "They attempted to access a joint savings account you had several years ago." I froze. I barely remembered it, an account Emily had convinced me to add her name to during the chaos of Bob's illness. I had trusted her completely back then. "There was $12,000 in it," Mr. Harris said. "They tried to withdraw everything." My breath caught. Our system flagged the account because of the alerts we placed after the incident. Security was called. "The funds have been transferred fully into your name. They're safe." After the call ended, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. The bank incident hadn't been their first attempt. It had only been the one that failed. That evening, watching the sun set over the Tuscan hills through my memory, I understood something fundamental. Setting boundaries hadn't just protected my future. It had saved me from losing more of my past. The next morning, on my last day in Italy, I sat in a small cafe with my journal. I had started writing at the suggestion of the support group, and the pages were slowly filling with thoughts I had never allowed myself to have. "I spent 69 years paying to be loved," I wrote. Now I understand that real love doesn't charge interest. 2 years later, I woke up in a different house. A small cottage in a quiet neighborhood on the other side of town. I had sold the old house 6 months after returning from Europe. It held too many ghosts. Too many reminders of the woman I used to be. This house was mine, chosen by me, decorated according to my taste. Peaceful. That Saturday morning, as I made coffee in my kitchen, the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, my heart skipped. Lily stood on my porch. She was taller now, thinner, 11 years old, and carrying herself with a seriousness that startled me. She had come alone. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly. "Can I come in? I need to talk to you." As she sat across from me, she asked the question I had been preparing for and dreading for 2 years. "Is it true," she said carefully, "that my parents tried to steal your money at the bank?" I took a deep breath. "Yes," I said gently, "it's true." She nodded, as if confirming something she had already known. "I found your letters," she admitted. "Mom hid them." We talked for hours. I told her the truth, not with anger, not with blame, but with honesty. I showed her my paintings. We baked cookies. We walked through my garden. When she left, she hugged me tightly. "I want to know the real you," she said, "not just the grandma who gives things." That night, I wrote one final line in my journal. This was never revenge. This was liberation. After Lily left that afternoon, the house felt different. Not empty, just quiet in a way that didn't hurt. I stood by the kitchen window for a long time, watching her walk down the street with her backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders. She didn't look back, not because she didn't care, but because she didn't need to. For the first time, our relationship wasn't built on obligation or expectation. It was built on truth. That night, I slept deeply. No nightmares, no sudden jolts awake from imagined phone calls or invented emergencies. When morning came, it felt earned. In the weeks that followed, Lily began writing to me. Real letters, careful handwriting, pages folded neatly, hidden between the covers of library books she borrowed from friends so her mother wouldn't see. She told me about school, about a science project she was proud of, about how she liked reading now because books didn't ask her for anything. She didn't ask for money. She asked questions. About Italy, about my paintings, about Grandpa Bob, about how someone knows when they're doing the right thing even when it hurts. I answered every letter honestly. Not as a victim, not as a martyr, but as a woman who had finally learned to live without apologizing for her existence. Emily never stopped being angry. I heard things through Susan, through family members who meant well but didn't fully understand. That I had changed. That I had abandoned my role. That I had become cold. I didn't correct them. People who benefit from your silence will always call your boundaries cruelty. Jason disappeared from my thoughts almost entirely. Once the money was gone, so was his interest. That realization hurt, but only briefly. It confirmed what I had already learned at the bank. Under fluorescent lights and shaking hands. He had never loved me. He had only needed me. As for Emily, there were moments, quiet moments. Usually at night, when grief would wash over me unexpectedly. Not grief for the relationship we had lost, but for the one we never truly had. I mourned the daughter I thought I was raising. The future I imagined where love flowed freely without conditions. But grief, I learned, does not mean regret. Regret asks you to go back. Grief simply asks you to feel. 2 years after Italy, on my 71st birthday, I sat in my small garden with Eleanor and Rachel, sunlight filtering through the leaves. We ate cake I had baked myself and laughed about how none of us would have recognized this version of me even 5 years earlier. I used to think being alone was the worst thing that could happen to a woman, I said, surprising myself with how calm my voice sounded. Rachel smiled. And now? And now I know the worst thing is being surrounded by people who only love you for what you give. That evening, after everyone left, I opened my journal for the last time. I read back through the early pages, the fear, the guilt, the doubt, the constant questioning of whether I was allowed to choose myself, whether I was allowed to survive without permission. Then I turned to a blank page and wrote. I was taught that love meant sacrifice without limits. I learned too late that this belief almost destroyed me. But I learned in time to save myself. I closed the journal and placed it on the shelf beside my paintings. Outside, the wind moved gently through the garden. Somewhere down the street, a child laughed. Life went on, not because I held it together for others, but because I had finally stepped into it for myself. I am no longer the woman who always says yes. I am a woman who knows the value of her life, her time, and her peace. And that, more than any inheritance, more than any money I ever gave away, is the legacy I will leave behind. Not revenge. Freedom.